Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a really interesting concept called supernatural enlargement, based on a sermon from Apostle Michael Arokbo. We're going to explore a framework for growth that, well, goes way beyond the ordinary.
But before we get into all the specifics, let's just start with the big question that this whole idea is trying to answer. What does it actually mean to grow past your current limits? I mean, how do we genuinely expand beyond the boundaries we see in our lives right now?
So the whole launching point for this framework is this ancient text from Isaiah. And the key idea here is pretty powerful. Growth isn't something that just happens to you. Nope, it's an active, intentional process. You have to make the space for more. So let's see how this idea gets broken down.
Okay, here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 4 parts. First, what is this type of enlargement, really? Second, what's the point of it all? Then we'll look at where you can actually see it showing up in life. And finally, we'll get to the real engine that's supposed to drive the whole thing.
All right, first up, let's talk about the foundational beliefs. We've got to lay the groundwork before we can build anything on top of it, right? So this is presented as this 3-part dynamic, almost like a dance. It kicks off with the belief that a divine being is the ultimate source of this growth. Then it's on the individual to actually expect it to happen. But, and this is a big but, that expectation has to be matched with your own personal responsibility and action. It's a partnership.
And here's what's so crucial to get. This framework defines enlargement as something way bigger than just, getting more money or becoming famous. It's this holistic expansion that's meant to touch every single area of your life, from your internal capacity and your relationships, all the way to your external influence and territory.
So that's the what. Now let's dig into the why. In this way of thinking, what's the actual purpose of all this growth? Why does it even matter?
Well, according to the source material, the motivation for enlargement isn't about personal comfort or luxury. It's actually tied to these 5 much bigger, divine purposes. Things like fulfilling some preordained plan, showing a higher power's glory, or being trusted with more responsibility so you can serve others and even protect future generations.
Okay, so if this growth is really happening, where does it actually show up? Let's look at the practical, real-world arenas where this kind of enlargement is supposed to become visible. First up, we've got territory. And this is described as way more than just physical land. It's about expanding your reach into new groups of people. Maybe that's different age groups, or professional circles, or even entirely new cities and regions.
Next is influence and authority, and the distinction here is super important. This isn't just about being popular or having a lot of followers. It's about having the kind of credibility where you can genuinely shape decisions, change how people think, and actually lead.
The third arena, resources and wealth. Now, within this framework, money is seen as a critical tool for getting things done. It's the means to fund large-scale work and give practical help to people. It's not the end goal itself.
And to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, the source mentions a single event costing 40 million naira. That's a huge number. Tens of thousands in US dollars. It's a really powerful example that's used to drive home the point that to pull off big visions, you need significant, tangible financial resources.
And finally, there's fruitfulness and impact. This is kind of the bottom line, right? It's all about producing undeniable, transformative results, creating lasting change in people, in communities, and maybe even in entire systems. So the big question is, how does any of this actually happen? Well, according to this framework, all of that external growth we just talked about, it all hinges on one central internal component.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The argument here makes a sharp distinction between a person's spirit and their soul. The spirit is seen as already complete the moment of salvation. So the focus of growth isn't about improving the spirit. Instead, the real work is on developing the soul, which is defined here as your mind, your will, and your emotions, so that it can finally express what the spirit already contains.
Think of this internal capacity like a container. It's really that simple. If the container doesn't grow, you can't pour anything more into it. Purpose, resources, increase, they're all said to be released in direct proportion to how much you've developed your own personal capacity.
This statement from the source just hits the nail on the head. Calling without capacity will result in collapse. Wow. It's a really stark warning, isn't it? It says that having a huge vision without building the internal foundation to support it will eventually lead to a total collapse.
So you're probably asking, okay, how do I build this capacity? Well, the source points to several key areas for development, and they focus heavily on internal stuff.
things like character, love, and discipline, as well as spiritual practices like prayer, study, and being a good steward of what you already have. So, if we were to distill this whole entire framework down to one core message, it would be this. Sustainable, true enlargement is an inside-out job. All that external growth, the territory, the influence, the impact, it's all seen as a direct result of an internal capacity that you've intentionally worked to expand.
And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. If you set aside any specific belief system for a moment, it's a really powerful prompt for some self-reflection. What personal capacities, whether it's knowledge or emotional intelligence or discipline, are you actively developing right now to support the growth you want to see in your own life?